Empyreans are a pervasive mystery in Elden Ring. Many theories have been constructed, and many seem just as logical as the last. For my part, I wanted to discuss the connections I've drawn for each of the Empyreans in Elden Ring. Every Empyrean we meet in the game, Ranni, Malenia, and Miquella, are each demigods, and each a child of Marika. But we also have the Glowmite Queen, who is reported to be an Empyrean. We don't know much about the Glowmite Queen, but we do know she was and is associated with death as the wielder of destined death. Hey YouTube, it's Lure Me to Death. Today let's discuss the connections the Empyreans of Elden Ring have to the cycle of life and death, or sometimes, as I'll call it, the cycle of a soul. Let's journey together to discover what it means to be an Empyrean in Elden Ring. Throughout our journey as the Tarnished, we meet several of Marika's demigod children, and each seem to hold a special bond to a divine essence. Mesmer is bound to the divine essence of the abyssal flame. Godwin perhaps was once bound to lightning, but his soulless corpse is now infected by the death once held by the Glowmite Queen. Moth channels the fiery blood and pain of the formless mother. Morgott is cursed by the divine wrath of the Hornsent. Ranni channels the arcane element of the wintry moon. Rykard is blended with the god-devouring serpent in the elemental lava. Radahn has within his palm the very law of gravity which halts and controls fate. Miquella is the lord of sleep and the slumbering egg before it would hatch. Malenia is afflicted by the divine rot of transformation and rebirth. Melina is a trickier one, but she seems to be linked to the flame of ruin. Each of these children of Marika seem to be vessels for these divine elements. It is my assumption that these demigods each house these elements or essences because they are Numen. For the sake of my argument, this means they are of shaman descent, meaning their flesh melds well with, or perhaps even invites foreign aspects to dwell within, especially foreign aspects of the divine. But not all children of Marika are Empyreans. Only Miquella, Malenia, and Ranni can claim that title. So why is this? Well, an Empyrean, I theorize, is a particularly powerful vessel able to house the divine essences of life, death, and rebirth. And because of this, they are candidates to become chthonic deities of the cycle of a soul. To begin, we must first look at our two most mysterious figures, the Glowmite Queen and Marika. I have a lot of theories on who the Glowmite Queen could be, but for now let's focus on what we know for certain. She is certainly connected to death, having once wielded destined death. I think her connection to death is quite plain. Now, for Marika, despite being the god of the world of Elden Ring, she is honestly the most impenetrable to me. Her rule during the Age of Godfrey was one of abundant life, and her rule during the time of the Tarnished is one of painful, unending life. Needless to say, her domain seems to be life, but beyond this, she's a mystery. And perhaps her domain being life is why Empyreans of death or rebirth are chosen. Where there was once life, the natural cycle demands death. But with death removed, the cycle is attempting to rectify itself any way it can. So what does this mean for our Empyreans? begin our journey with our Empyrean children, let's first look at Miquella. who is or was partly Saint Trina. Miquella and Saint Trina represent the essence of sleep, of the slumbering soul just before it is born into the waking world. In this slumbering state, the soul is pure, nascent, and naive. When a soul is born or awakes, it begins to grow and change, for better or worse. In my opinion, this is why Miquella and Saint Trina are associated both with being nascent and with sleep. This naivety of a soul before it would wake. It is also important to note the connection between sleep and death, because Saint Trina, separated from Miquella, comes close to being a goddess of death herself. If we think of sleep and death, Hypnos and Thanatos in Greek mythology, they are twins, the sons of Nyx, the goddess of night. If we look at mythic ideas of sleep rather than the physical act of sleeping, there is a long-standing connection between these two. Furthermore, death is likened by Socrates in Plato's words to be like a dreamless sleep. And if it is unconsciousness, like a sleep in which the sleeper does not even dream, death would be a wonderful game. For I think if anyone were to pick out that night in which he slept a dreamless sleep and, comparing with all the other nights and days of his life, were to say, after due consideration, how many days and nights in his life had passed more pleasantly than that night. Here Socrates is arguing that death should be like a dreamless sleep. No consciousness, only the passage of time without knowledge. This is the kind of sleep Saint Trina seems to bring in her most potent state. The world of sleep and death are further connected in Greek mythology by Hypnos and Thanatos being chthonic deities residing in Hades, where souls travel after death. I think this mythic and philosophical conception of sleep is present in Elden Ring, whether by influence of George R.R. Martin or the FromSoft team, and I think the connection to Greek mythology does not come from nowhere. You see, the connection to Hypnos may explain why Miquella has such a connection to charm and enchantment. Hypnos is the root word of hypnosis, and hypnosis supposedly puts a subject in a state more susceptible to suggestion. And as we know, the peace of the deepest slumber can be so very hard to resist. Separated from Miquella, Saint Trina's essence becomes one that offers the poison of eternal slumber. And what is eternal dreamless slumber? As stated earlier, it's akin to death. And Saint Trina is Miquella's very soul, causing Miquella to be equally associated with this state. This is how I see Miquella's connection to the cycle of a soul. He and Saint Trina together represent the sleeping soul before it is born, or perhaps reborn, or perhaps even the soul's ability to enter a state of motionlessness where it will grow no further and collect no more experience. It is a version of death where there is no death. This is why it's an intoxicant for beings that have been denied their destined end. Perhaps only the long dreamless slumber may soothe this restless, deathless soul.
Heed my words. I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella. And I have never known defeat.
Malenia, Blade of Miquella. She holds within her the essence of rot. Rot is a transformative substance seeming to bring metamorphosis to all those who come into contact with it. I think of rot as being something akin to the cellular soup of the pupal stage of a moth or butterfly. Being a being of transformation, I think makes Malenia representative of the metamorphosis of a soul. In a world without death, perhaps seeking transformation is one path to being free of Marika's rule of unending life. We can see evidence of this transformative ability of Rot in Caelid with the pests. At the Caelid Waypoint ruins, there is a small catacomb down a set of stairs where we may see many sarcophagi with eggs that seem to have hatched into larval pests. These pests seem to have been born from the corpses in these sarcophagi. Whether it's by using the flesh or the person themselves having been reborn, either way, new transformed life has sprung from the hatched eggs in the tomb. The giant dogs of Caelid are similarly transformed, as are the crows. Whether this is a direct result of coming into contact with the rot itself or eating carrion infected by it, the result is transformation. Furthermore, throughout the Halig tree, we see fuzzy moth-like cocoons. These cocoons resemble the cocoons of silk moths. Because humans desire silk, they have bred and overbred silkworms. Now, silkworms weave their own cocoons out of this precious material that they make naturally, but are unable to free themselves due to the breeding and engineering by humans. The cocoons we see in the Halig tree seem to be the form of albinorids, also an engineered species. I think these cocoons present in the Halig tree further the connection of Malenia to transformation. I believe the cocoons are a result of the two Empyreans, Miquella and Malenia, where Malenia represents transformation, and as the inhabitants imbibe in the sap from the basins, they begin to metamorphosize. But because of Miquella's influence, they are unable to hatch. This influence of Miquella may be twofold. One, in Miquella's power keeping Malenia asleep, whether this is on purpose or through mere proximity, making her unable to guide the inhabitants. And two, through the sap being infused with Miquella's own essence, slumber. The soul cannot wake and cannot complete its metamorphosis. Whether this connection holds any water to your understanding of Elden Ring is up to you, but I think there is a strong connection between Malenia and metamorphosis, a type of rebirth of the soul. In a land stripped of death, perhaps metamorphosis is a way to allow for growth and change. As for our dear Ranni, who you all voted as the best Empyrean, well, I believe the dark wintry moon of Ranni is an allusion to another chthonic deity, Hecate. Hecate is a complex goddess that has come to mean many things in modern and ancient traditions. We won't go too deep into this, well, maybe a little, but it goes without saying that the witch goddess is associated with moon and magic. Interestingly enough, Hecate is suspected to have origins from the Carians of Anatolia. And as we have discussed in my previous video on the origins of Numen, the region of Anatolia and their beliefs seem important to the story of Elden Ring, especially of the aptly named Carians. Hecate is the goddess of the moon. Ranni herself is plainly associated with the moon. Hecate is also heavily associated with dogs and ghosts, and is considered to be a liminal goddess. Ranni may not be associated with dogs, but the Carian royals are heavily associated with wolves, the primal ancestors of tamer dogs. And Ranni herself is a spirit, a type of ghost, and is also in a liminal existence between life and death. Furthermore, Hecate is said to be the holder of the keys that may unlock the gates of death. Ranni, author of the Night of the Black Knives, restored death, in part, to the lands between. This night also precipitated the shattering of the Elden Ring, which in turn is the instigator of our journey as the Tarnished, which ultimately leads to the freeing of destined death from Malekith. To further this connection between Hecate and the Carian royals, we have Hecate as the triple goddess. the maiden, mother, and crone. There is a division in Hecate's traditional role and Hellenistic traditional views of the goddess being unrelated to the crone. This is in opposition to modern pagan witchcraft traditions that often place her as the previously mentioned triple goddess. However, the fact remains that she is associated with the maiden, mother, and crone today. This entity, the triple goddess, is also present in George R.R. Martin's own mythos in A Song of Ice and Fire. This is all to say that I believe Rani is heavily inspired by Hecate. Perhaps she is the maiden, Renala is the mother, and the crone is, well, the snowy crone, though we do not meet her in the flesh. I believe this is for a reason, that being the removal of the rune of death. The crone is the representation of the final stage of life, and can also be seen as the patron of the end of a cycle. In Elden Ring, Rani does take the form of a triple goddess, taking the form of the snowy crone by way of the doll, and her own mother by way of magic spell during Renala's boss fight. And of course, she was originally the maiden. In my opinion, Rani's, the maiden's, adherence to the teachings of the Dark Moon of Death, the Dark Moon of the Snowy Crone, is once again the world attempting to right itself by returning a form of an end, of death to the lands between. There is also the connection of Rani's appearance to the goddess Hel of Norse mythology, who rules over the dead in Helheim located deep in Niflheim. This is a place of ice and cold. While we must remember that Rani's doll appearance is not Rani's herself, it's a replication of her mentor, the Snowy Crone, this doll form is ultimately the image of Rani we see in the game. And the metaphor, I think, is plain to see. Hel is described as half blue and half flesh-colored. Rani's half-spirit, half-doll appearance, I think, is meant to invoke Hel, a guide to the dead. To me, it's apparent that Rani is something akin to a psychopomp. Neither Hel nor Hecate are death itself, but seem to be guides or guardians. To me, Rani represents the passage of a soul from life into the next part of its journey. But that journey is not for the living to know.
I do solemnly swear to every living being and every living soul. Now cometh the age of the stars, 1,000-year voyage under the wisdom of the moon. Here beginneth the chill night that encompasses all, reaching the great beyond. Into fear, doubt, and loneliness, as the path stretcheth into darkness.
I truly feel the connection between the chosen Empyreans and the cycle of life and death is important to their status. It is what has caused the Two Fingers to choose them as worthy vessels of the Elden Ring, of the Elden Beast. It is also my personal belief that each of these Empyrean children is a result of the crucible, the very essence of life and nature attempting to correct itself. Because they are children of America, they are able to house and invite divinity to dwell within their bodies. Them being chosen as Empyreans is Metyr, or the Fingers, or the Elden Beast attempting to suppress and control this natural force that keeps welling up. If they are capable of bearing those divine essences, perhaps, if divested of sleep, rot, or wintry ice, of this part of divinity that has melded with them and manifested as part of their souls, they would be capable of bearing the cycle demanded by the Elden Beast. Perhaps, if divested of it, Elden Beast may replace that very part of their discarded soul. a parasite hollowing out the host. But as with all FromSoft games, I think this is all a natural cosmic cycle on a grander scale than even seen in the game. A grand cycle of life and death repeating for eternity. Eventually, life will usurp death, and death will usurp life. The length of each cycle may vary, maybe hundreds, thousands, even millions of years. But one day it will end and begin again. As I'm sure you noticed, I didn't link Malenia to any particular chthonic deity. I do see some connections between her and Persephone, but these connections are pretty loose. Flowers and butterflies being symbols of spring just aren't enough to draw any connections with any conviction. I've also always thought about the Japanese creator and death goddess Izanami when thinking about Malenia, but there too the connections are as thin as spiderwebs. Or silk moth threads? Even so, what do you think? Is there a connection between Empyreans and their divine essences to the cycle of life and death? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.